On this episode, I talk with James Clear about his book, Atomic Habits, an easy and proven way to build good habits and break bad ones. And as soon as I heard that James was coming out with a book, I knew I wanted to have him on the show. I've been reading his work for years online over at his site, jamesclear.com. He's built up a huge audience with writing scientifically backed, research-based articles and has advice that truly works. But in this episode, we discuss his journey, how developing better habits is the key to success, how to find happiness along the journey, what habit loops consist of, and much more. All right, here we go. All right, today's guest is James Clear. He is an author and entrepreneur who writes at jamesclear.com, which gets millions of views every month. And he's here today to talk about his new book, Atomic Habits. James, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, you bet. Great to be talking to you.
And I was telling you in the pre-interview, I've been following your work for quite some time now and just want to say thank you for your work. It's been impactful in my own life. Thank you for backing up whatever you say with scientific research too. And it's not only been helpful in my life, but the millions of people that follow your work, and was commenting too on just the success you've had with the book first week being out, and congrats on that.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're enjoying the work, and I'm just doing my best to share ideas that are useful and people find helpful. So it's really gratifying to do that and hear from folks like you and other readers who are enjoying it and finding the ideas actionable and practical.
And it seems almost like you started blogging maybe at the beginning of this. Is that right? I'm trying to think of when I first found out about your work, maybe 2010, 2012. I don't. It's been a while.
Yeah. So the first article on jamesclear.com was published November 12th, 2012.
Okay.
And I did a new article every Monday and Thursday for the first 3 years. And that really was the habit that like led to the growth of the site and the growth of my business. I mean, that was the thing that kind of put me on the trajectory I'm on now. Then after the first 3 years, I signed the book deal to write Atomic Habits, and spent 3 years working on that and dialed back the weekly writing while I was working on the book, but still continued to publish. And then now I got them both. I got the book done. And after there were a lot of lessons learned while I was writing the book. There were a lot of like hurdles and stuff I had to jump through and figure out how to manage myself and all kinds of little things. But I'm really proud of the book. I'm proud of what I was able to create with it. And I hope that people will continue to find it useful and helpful. And yeah, just excited to be sharing it.
And, I have an online business as well, and many listeners have some sort of space in the online world as well that they're trying to build. Would you say consistency is the main thing that you would maybe give as advice to those trying to grow their audience? Do you think that's what ultimately led to your success online?
I would say that people don't like that answer because it's not really a sexy one or a tactical or strategic one.
Yeah.
But I do think that that's probably the thing that makes the majority of difference, if we're being honest about it. That and, and some kind of like luck and randomness. But I'll come back to that in a second. Like we do have a little more control over that than maybe what it sounds. It's kind of like going to the gym. Like you go to the gym, and usually when people are getting ready to get in shape or get motivated to take on some kind of new program, there are all kinds of questions, and a lot of them are really not actually that relevant to the thing that makes the biggest difference. Like, what kind of workout shoes should I buy? Or what are the best running shoes? Or what type of knee sleeves do you wear? Or what's the best protein powder? Or all that stuff. And really, that makes like the last 2% of difference. I mean, the thing that makes 98% of the difference is, are you not missing workouts? Are you putting in your reps? Like the real answer to how do I get in shape? It's like, well, just find a program that's like halfway decent and don't miss a workout for 2 years and then get back to me. And I think that writing and building an online business is kind of like that as well. There's more strategy to it. It's not that strategy or tactics are like not important at all.
Sure.
But it's just that if you don't, like in my case, I don't think there's anything magical about writing twice a week. But if you don't do that, if you don't show up and at least have, I turned around 2 years later, I had like 200 articles or whatever. That makes everything easier if you have that. Like it makes If you try your best each time and you write 200 articles, then some of those are going to be decent. And when a couple of them are decent, every marketing strategy is easier. Like social media works easier because the content is good. If you want to build a partnership with other companies or brands and have them like share your work with their audience, that's easier because the content is good. But you can't have any of that if you don't show up consistently. It's like, again, to bring it back to the gym, imagine if I only went and worked out on days when I felt like, okay, I could hit a PR today. And it's like, it doesn't work that way. Like if I only showed up once a month, then you wouldn't be able to hit a PR anyway, because you're not doing the training. And I think that creating and building content, whether it's a podcast or YouTube channel or articles, like you have to be willing to show up and create a fair amount of junk or just average work so that you can get those ideas out of the way. And then every now and then this kind of like gem comes through, or, you strike gold on a particular idea.
Yeah.
And I think that comes back to this point that I was mentioning earlier about luck and randomness. There is an element of luck in all this, but the good news is that you can increase your surface area for luck by showing up and putting in your reps. Like the first time that I was featured in the New York Times was for an article that I wrote like 3 or 4 years ago, and it just happened earlier this year. And for whatever reason, the editor there was reading this old article that I wrote, one of those, 200 or 300, and that particular one struck them. And it wasn't until a couple years later that happened, and then I got featured there. And then that piece that was in the Times got picked up by CBS This Morning, and then they had me on the morning show, and I like flew to New York and did that. And like my point is just that all of that was like kind of dumb luck, but it also wasn't, because I showed up and put the reps in and like had this very broad surface area for something good happening. You like don't know where lightning will strike for you, but if you're willing to kind of create this large body of work or large surface area for good things, then you're more likely that, something lucky will strike for you at some point.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder. And I mean, seeing where you're at now with the book deal, maybe people are, I'm sure with the book launching, you're getting a whole new set of audience members joining in your email list and such, but those that have been following you have seen the work you've put in over the years. But the story at the beginning of your book, as I was reading it, I could identify with that younger person, you saying that you wanted to be a baseball player. I wanted to be a professional baseball player too, and found myself where I am today. But like in between being a baseball player and where you're at today, what inside you said, I want to write scientific research backed pieces and then eventually write a book and start a business? Was that your end goal, or did you have just a love for writing and wanted to start writing and was just curious about those things? What happened in between baseball player to starting a blog that made you want to do that?
Well, the short answer is no.
Okay.
It wasn't my end goal, but I started first of all, my background from an academic standpoint is very science based. So
Okay.
my actual major in undergrad was called biomechanics, but it was mostly chemistry and physics classes. So I was mostly like hard sciences. I took some biology, I took some anatomy. I was like on this path where I was planning on going to medical school. And so I was very scientifically based. Then I went to graduate school and I was getting my MBA. And one of my graduate assistantships, my job on campus, was to study venture capital investment in the region. So I was like studying all these companies that were getting funded. And that was the first time that I kind of got the itch to start something myself. Like this was in the Center for Entrepreneurship. And so I saw all these other people doing it. And I was like, if these people are all starting companies, like maybe I could do my own thing too. And I didn't have much of like a language or a template for doing that at the time. I didn't have any entrepreneurs in my family. I didn't really have any people that I was close friends with or, that I knew very well that were entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
So it took me a while to kind of get to the conclusion that, I should start my own business, because I just it wasn't top of mind for me. But eventually I did get to that point. And so I graduated, I finished graduate school and decided, rather than get a job, I'll just try to do my own thing. And so I did this, and I mostly just floundered around for like 2 years. I tried a bunch of different ideas. Some of them just fizzled immediately. Others seemed like they had a glimmer of hope and then would fade after a month or two. But then eventually I had one idea that worked well enough that I was able to build it up to about 20,000 email subscribers or so, which was not massive, but at the time around 2010, 2012, like wasn't a small audience either. And the reason that I was able to figure that out is because I finally acknowledged I have no idea how to market something. Like I don't know why someone would buy something or sign up to an email list, or like what gets people in the door basically. Because all the other business ideas I had been trying were just like flopping around and I wasn't able to market them. I was just like, well, if I build it, then they will come. I thought like, oh, if I just have this product, then it'll be fine. But the thing that finally clicked, and this led us down this path that I'm on now, is that I started reading about building an email list for a business. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like if I had an email list of people who were interested, then whenever I made a product, I could email them about it. And then, then maybe some of them would buy. So I started writing, I started blogging as a method to build a list for the business, not because I thought I want to be a writer and I want to write a book. And so I started to do that, and it surprised me. And this is true in many areas of life, but if you're willing to experiment with something, every now and then you get surprised. And I didn't realize that I was going to like writing as much as I did. And so I started writing, and what I really liked was not the writing itself. The writing itself was kind of hard, like it was effortful, required a lot of concentration. And most of my articles, even now, most of my articles take me a good amount of time. I mean, at the low end, maybe 10 hours, but most of them are like 15 to 20 hours a piece. So it takes me a while to work on them. And if I'm doing 2 a week, right, then like there's your 40-hour work week, just, on those 2 articles. So my point is that it was effortful to do the writing, but I really enjoyed the feedback. That was the part that surprised me. It was like, oh, I'll put an idea out and then I get emails from people who are saying like, that's helpful, or this is useful, or I enjoy this. And that was the part that was like addictive for me. And so I can remember early on, I would write an article and I would get maybe 1 email a week, but that email was enough to get me to show up again the next week and do it all over again. And it's really knowing that the work matters and that readers enjoy it that gets me to feel motivated to do it again. And so I started doing that and just tried to do the best I could and get better and better. And eventually, after a couple of years, I like knew what I was doing at least enough that when I started jamesclear.com, I started from scratch and I built a whole new site and I said, I'm going to actually write about the stuff I really care about and I'm excited about. But I at least had the business backing that time. I knew where to put the email forms. I knew how to design a website. I knew how to run an email list like that. And now I had skills, whereas before I didn't have any. And that helped a lot. And then as a result of the combination of knowing what to do and writing about stuff that I really cared about and using my kind of scientifically minded background that I had always had, now I kind of had all those things come together and it took off.
I love that story, how it wasn't your first idea was the idea. And again, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about, the consistency of showing up and trial and error, and eventually you found your way. I think people almost feel like people are chosen to be successful, but the more I talk to people, the backstory usually is showing up, trial and error, making mistakes, showing up again and again, and eventually becoming successful. And your story proves that again. So
Yeah, I think even if you like, I have a friend who his sister knew from 3rd grade that she wanted to be a teacher. And now we're all adults and she's a teacher.
Wow.
And every now and then you'll find somebody like that who like they just know from an early age, like this is what I'm destined to do. But I think those people are total outliers. That's very rare that someone has that level of clarity and is able to maintain that across the span of their life. And 2, even for her, it's not like it just happened. It's not like after 3rd grade, she said, I'm going to be a teacher. And then everybody's like, cool, here's your job. Like she still had to go to school and work and study and pass the tests and get certified and like all the other stuff. And so even if you are lucky enough to stumble upon your passion almost immediately, to realize it still requires a fair amount of work and effort and experimentation. And so I think all of us require some level of that willingness to experiment and implement ideas, even when we don't know exactly what that's going to turn out like. And that's true for people who have their passion figured out, know the kind of work they want to do. And it's doubly true for folks like myself who don't really know where they want to go and then end up kind of stumbling their way down a path.
There's no right or wrong answer. It's just such a more individualistic view on that. And that's kind of why it's hard to give blanket advice. It's sitting down with people one-on-one sometimes is the best way, but there are some things that are tried and true. And you definitely touch on that in the book, and we'll get to that in a minute. I first want to ask you about something that you write at the beginning of the book that was really interesting, and the graph that goes along with it. You say that if you can get just 1% better each day, you'll end up with results that are nearly 37 times better after 1 year. And I wanted to take a minute to ask you about it. So maybe talk a little bit about that, but then also, are there a few things that each individual can focus on to become 1% better every day? Or is that more of an individualistic view as well?
Well, so first of all, the math that you're mentioning comes out of like if you were to actually say, if I got 1% better each day and then tomorrow I get 1% better and so on, and you compound that over the course of an entire year, 365 days, then you end up 37 times better. And if you go 1% worse each day for 365 days, you drive yourself almost all the way down to zero. And so that's just the math equation. And I think that it helps encapsulate what it often feels like to build a habit or what progress feels like in the moment. And the reason I say that, I like this phrase that habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. And what I mean by that is the same way that money multiplies through compound interest, the effects of your habits multiply as you repeat them across time. And so in a sense, you can think of time as magnifying the margin between success and failure. Like if you get 1% better each day, that doesn't really feel like a whole lot on any given day. But over the span of days that make up your lifetime, that ends up being a very significant difference. And so time multiplies whatever you feed it. Like good habits make time your ally and bad habits make time your enemy. And so if you can understand and like accept that concept, then it gives you, I think, a better way of looking at why your daily choices, why a choice that's 1% better, 1% worse is not insignificant, but actually quite meaningful. And that's different than how it feels on any given day. You know, like what is the difference between eating a salad for lunch and eating a burger and fries? Most of the time, it doesn't really feel like a whole lot. Like your body looks basically the same in the mirror at the end of the night. The scale hasn't really changed that much. Like there's not a whole lot to say, don't do that today. But over the span of days, 2 years or 5 years or 10 years later, then you end up in like a wildly different place when those habits compound. And so the point of this idea of 1% improvement and it compounding over time and kind of having that like hockey stick curve where it doesn't really feel like a whole lot in the beginning. It's real low and slow and you don't really see much of a change. But then all the greatest returns are delayed. You turn around 10 years later and you're like in that hockey stick portion, you're, in a much different place. I think that helps encapsulate what it feels like on any given day to build a habit and why those choices that are small and tiny, 1% better, 1% worse, are still quite meaningful. Now, of course, no person is going to be like a robot and actually get exactly 1% better each day in exactly each area. But it helps to act as like a guiding principle for the idea that you don't need to make these radical life transformations. You don't need to have an epiphany. What you need to do is just try to find a small margin for improvement, a little way to continuously move the needle each day. And if you can wake up each day and have that mentality and attempt to do that, there are going to be many days when you do. And the end result a decade or two later is going to be very significant.
And I love that advice because what you're saying, biting off more than you can chew. Have you found that that's why most people quit before they find success?
It's certainly one reason.
Yeah.
One reason is that people choose habits that are far too difficult. And that's kind of a central thing I talk about. I think it's in chapter 12 or 13 of the book. I think chapter 13, where I talk about the 2-minute rule and this idea that you should downscale your habits to something you can do in just the first 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that you aren't ambitious, right? Like it doesn't mean, don't care about, important things or, hold yourself back or something like that. But it just means that you take whatever you're trying to achieve. Like I want to read 40 books a year and you scale that down to what can I do in the first 2 minutes? All right, read one page. And then you focus on building the habit of reading one page because you know that that's the only way you could ever get to reading 40 books a year anyway. Or do yoga 3 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat or something like that. And the idea here is that a habit must be established before it can be improved. So often people are focused on mastering a particular thing. We optimize for like the finish line. We look for the perfect diet plan or the best workout program or the perfect business idea. And we're so focused on like getting this ideal outcome that we forget to optimize for the starting line instead. And I think you need to master the art of showing up. And then once you do that, then you have options. Then you got a lot of choices for how to improve or optimize a habit. And that's why I think that 2-minute rule is crucial. The other big error, though, you mentioned like, do I think that's the biggest mistake? That's one, is choosing habits that are too big.
Okay.
The other big error is this kind of like all or nothing mentality. And this is very prevalent, especially with diets, is like the place where you really see it a lot. But it's like people choose a diet, they do it for like 5 days, then the next day rolls around and their friends want to go to happy hour, or they binge eat and have like a pizza at night or something. And then all this self-talk starts, and it's like, oh, see, I blew it. Like I knew I wasn't supposed to stick this diet, or I knew I didn't have it in me, or whatever. And then you're like, what? Screw it. I guess I just won't even bother. And for whatever reason, we do this to ourselves a lot. We like lock ourselves in and convince ourselves, if I can't do it all the way, if I can't just, if I can't be an entrepreneur full out, then why even bother with this, side hustle or business idea? Or if I can't stick to the diet perfectly, then why bother? But the mantra that I like to use for dealing with that is what I call never miss twice. And so the idea is just that, yeah, I wish I hadn't binge ate with my friends or gone to that happy hour or whatever, but that's over. And let me pour all of my energy into making a healthy meal tomorrow morning, right? Like never miss twice. And that idea has helped me kind of pull myself back on course. I mentioned I had that Monday, Thursday writing schedule for the first few years I was working on jamesclear.com. And if I missed on Thursday, like I wished I hadn't missed, but let me never miss twice. Let me pour all my energy into making sure I got back on Monday. And if you're able to do that, it helps you check out of that all or nothing mentality. And in the broad span of time, you turn back at the end of the year or whatever, and it's like, oh, well, that one time that I missed is just a blip on the screen now. It doesn't mean anything. And that's true for almost any habit. It's like almost never the first mistake that ruins you. It's like the spiral of repeated mistakes that follows. So if you can cut that off at the source and get back on track and start a new habit streak almost immediately, then that's a very powerful skill to be able to develop. So I think if you combine those two, downscaling your habits and starting with just the first 2 minutes and mastering the art of showing up and mastering the ability to never miss twice and get back on track quickly, well, I mean, just right there, you've got a really powerful combination for building habits that stick in the long run.
That's really good. That's really practical advice that listeners can take and go run with and make their lives instantly better. So thank you for that. I love how you draw it back to a daily practice of habits and routines that build up to your ultimate goal, to your big goal. But as you're talking there, like looking in the mirror with diets and such, I can think of other examples too, but I've experienced it in my own life, maybe not always being happy along the way. The journey is not always easy, is not always joyful. In your findings, did you find where, and I can't remember if you talked about it in your book or not, but ways to show up and be happier along the way as you're doing these things that aren't necessarily sexy, just trying to show up and have a better attitude, because it can get monotonous, if I'm honest, in my own life. So what do you think about that?
Sure. So this is something in the book I refer to as it's the fourth law of behavior change, which is make it satisfying. And this, I just want to talk a little bit about broadly, like why is this important? So when you perform any experience or have an experience throughout life, when the ending is satisfying, when the ending is enjoyable, it's kind of like this positive emotional signal to your brain that was like, oh, hey, that felt good. I should do this again next time. And the key here is it's positive. That's what reinforces it. But it's really the speed that's the key. And so this is something that in the book I refer to as the cardinal rule of behavior change, which is behaviors that are immediately rewarded get repeated, and behaviors that are immediately punished get avoided. And that speed is what reinforces a behavior, even if it ultimately doesn't serve you. So like you can think of pretty much any behavior as having multiple outcomes across time. So for example, eating a donut, the immediate outcome is favorable. It's sugary, it's tasty, it's sweet, it's enjoyable. Right in the moment, the immediate ending is satisfying. But the ultimate outcome, if you repeat that habit for a week or a month or a year, is unfavorable, right? It's unhealthy, unproductive, so on. Many good habits are often the reverse, where the immediate outcome is a little bit like unfavorable. Like the immediate outcome of going to the gym is it's kind of effortful and you sweat and there's like a trade-off. You can't watch TV during that hour. You have to be like running on the treadmill or lifting weights or whatever. But the ultimate outcome, if you repeat that habit a month or a year from now, is favorable and productive and healthy. And so a lot of the battle of getting yourself to stick to good habits and break bad ones is about figuring out ways to pull those long-term consequences of your bad habits into the present moment. So you feel a little bit of pain right now and you have a reason to avoid it. And taking the long-term rewards, the enjoyment of your good habits, and pulling those into the present moment so that, as you just asked, you feel happy and satisfied and enjoy the process and, want to show up and it's not monotonous. And there are a variety of ways to do this. Some of my favorite examples are actually product design for companies. Like the classic example is toothpaste. There's no reason that toothpaste needs to taste minty. The mint flavor doesn't actually make toothpaste like clean your teeth better. It doesn't make it more effective. But it does lead to a clean mouth feel. It allows you to have this like refreshing, clean feel. And that is more satisfying, more enjoyable than just having like some kind of bland paste on your teeth. And as a result, you're more likely to repeat the habit because you enjoy that experience. More recently, car companies have started to do this so a couple of years ago, BMW added this system to one of their models where if you pressed on the gas, if you stomped on the accelerator really hard, it would pump additional engine growl through the speakers of the car so that it felt more satisfying to like step on the gas and like there was this loud roar when you were driving the car. Ford did something similar where there's like a valve that when you're just driving normally, it stays closed. And so the interior is soundproofed. And then when you really step on the gas, the valve opens and lets the engine noise in. It's, more satisfying or whatever. But the point here is that behaviors that have some immediate satisfaction like that are enjoyable like that, whether it's brushing your teeth or stepping on the gas, are more likely to be repeated because you get some positive signal that, hey, this was good. I did this and I should do it again next time. And for your habits, you can do the same thing, but it can come in a couple different ways. So the first is using some kind of external reinforcer, and so like the common examples, like, every time your kid gets an A on their report card, they get $5 or something like that. You use some kind of, reinforce. I mean, we all do that as workers, where like we go to work and then we get a paycheck in 2 weeks, and your paycheck is an external reinforcement that gets you to perform the habit of showing up at work every day. And so you can do that. There is a caveat, which is I think you want to make sure that the external reinforcement does not conflict with the internal identity you're trying to build, right? Like if you go to the gym and you work out and then your reward is I get to eat a bowl of ice cream after my workout, well, like on the one hand, you're casting a vote for being a healthy person with the workout, and then you're casting a vote for being unhealthy with the ice cream. So it's kind of like it's like a wash,
Yeah.
Yeah. So instead, I think it's better to do something like after my workout, I get to reward myself by taking a bubble bath. And like both of those are kind of a vote for taking care of your body. And so you're like staying aligned with the identity that you're looking to build. Anyway, so my point there is that external reinforcers can be good ways to make habits satisfying in the moment. You also can create a little bit of a game with it. So like I heard of a parent who they were trying to get their kids to floss their teeth. And so each time that they would floss, they had this little jar on the counter in the bathroom where most of the marbles in the jar were like, say, red, and a couple of them were blue. And so each time they floss, they finish flossing their teeth at night, the kids get to reach their hand in and pull a marble out. And if it's a red one, then it's nothing. But if it's one of the special blue ones, then they get to, have some kind of reward, whether it's watch 5 minutes of their favorite video or, I don't know, like redeem it for a snack at lunch the next day or something like that. And so you don't always get the reward, but you do get the satisfaction of like playing the game. And so you can do stuff like that to try to increase it for yourself as well. And, maybe every time you come back from the gym, you pull a marble out of your jar. And occasionally, if they're, say like 1 out of 50 is the right color, you get to, I don't know, buy a new jacket or something like that. And so the point here is that those external reinforcers can be good, but the ultimate form of satisfaction and reinforcement and enjoying the process is a reinforcement of your desired identity, because that now it's no longer external, it's actually internal. And so for me, I now just being the type of person who works out, that's an important part of my identity. So as soon as I show up at the gym, as soon as I do 1 rep, I get the satisfaction of feeling like I'm reinforcing being the type of person I want to be or being the type of person I am. And I think that can totally work but I don't think that it happens immediately for people. I don't think you just flip a switch and you're like, well, I'm going to be the type of person who works out. And so then you go there and you start to like believe it about yourself. Now you can still want that. You can say that, all the things I just said. But I think you need to prove to yourself a couple times and like build up evidence of, hey, actually, I am this kind of person. And once you get to that point, then maybe it's a little bit more satisfying to slog through it. It doesn't make it easy on every day. There's still plenty of workouts that are difficult for me, but I do get that sense of satisfaction even when the workout itself feels monotonous.
And what you just described there, that's the habit loop that you mentioned in the book, correct? The cue, craving, response, reward. Is that it in action? How it works?
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's certainly one example of it. And we've been talking mostly about the reward, the final stage, which is a key for getting you to repeat an experience. If you just want to perform an experience once, then the reward isn't that as essential. What is essential is the expectation of a reward or expectation of a positive experience. But if you want to get a habit to stick, you really need to have some kind of sense of satisfaction, some reason to repeat it again in the future.
Okay. Yeah, that was really interesting. Seemed foundational to the book. And whose work was that originally? Do you remember who?
Well, it's kind of a combination, but I would
Okay.
say if we're talking about the reward aspect, then I would say it's mostly like Edward Thorndike, who I mentioned in chapter 3 of the book, and B.F. Skinner, who's also mentioned in that chapter, and kind of the whole behavioral psychology movement. They were some of the first ones to experimentally combine or tie habits to, hey, there's some kind of cue or stimulus that precedes the action, and there's some kind of reward that the animal or the subject gets after performing the action. So like a light would turn on in the lab, and then a monkey would like press a lever and they would get like a food pellet as a reward. And so they became conditioned to every time the light came on, they pressed the lever. And so it was really the reward that helped like tie that experience together.
That was a really interesting part of your book. And the equation from the book that really stands out and I think sums up our conversation pretty well is you say that habits plus deliberate practice equals mastery. And I think that's something that I'm after, listeners are after, and obviously you're after as well. So thank you so much for the conversation today and just all the things to think about with creating better habits, putting better systems into place so we can live the lives we ultimately want. But wrapping up here, one of the last questions I like to ask every guest, and it could be something that we've touched on already today that you want to highlight. It could be something that we didn't get to today. But if you could leave listeners with one last piece of advice, what would that be?
Well, I think that if I'm going to encourage somebody to start in a particular place, it would be to utilize the 2-minute rule. Scale your habits down to just the first 2 minutes, master the art of showing up. And once you become the type of person who shows up each day, then you've got options and you can try to improve from there. So focus on the one habit that you'd like to build. Just pick one. You can have more than one. That's fine. But for now, just focus on one. Scale it down to 2 minutes. Show up for at least a few weeks. And then once you become that type of person who's showing up every day, then you can improve.
Thank you for getting so practical with advice because oftentimes we want to say these lofty ideas that are hard to implement, but that's easy to implement. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
It will instantly make our lives better. Last question for you, and I'm guessing you will send people to find your new book, but where would you like to send people to find out more about you and your work?
Sure. So if you just want to see more from me and kind of check out some of my articles, jamesclear.com is a good place to go. If you click on articles, I've got them kind of organized by category and so on, so you can just poke around on what's interesting to you. And obviously we've talked a little bit about what's in Atomic Habits, the new book that I wrote, which is intended to be like the definitive comprehensive guide on how to build good habits and break bad ones. And if you'd like to see that, you can check out atomichabits.com.
Perfect. Everybody go get a copy of the book right now. It's so good, and you will not be disappointed. All right. Thanks again for your time. Really love this conversation.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you got something out of these ideas. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode.